What brought me here, it was just an opportunity. I met my business partner, Carol Gorni, in Italy. She is a good friend with my mom's cousin from Cleveland, Ohio. So we had conversations about like things that she loved in Italy, and obviously food was one of them. And we talk about like what it would take for us to be partners in this kind of business. And one thing led to another, and we just work it out. And 5 years later, here we are. I think it was either the second year of our operation here that the city actually asked us to be part of the Beat the Beater. So we basically had like probably 20 kids between 5-ish to 11 something. And so I basically introduced them to the world of the pizza. So how to knead the dough and what it's all the little science behind. And then obviously we had fun with, actually stretching the dough and then top the dough with the ingredients and cooking in the oven. They had fun through all the process. It was like, beginning was a little lesson, and so they were actually very interested in that. But then obviously, the reason they were there was because they want to use their hands in the dough. So that was pretty fun. We can try to make tagliatelle noodles made with eggs and flour by using only a few ingredients and tools. And we are going to make also a basil pesto sauce that we can use it and actually make the final dish together. To make this dish, we need eggs, we need flour. It can be all-purpose flour. And then what we need for the sauce would be like basil, and we only need a container that we can use to put the basil inside, the basil inside, and then some olive oil. And if you guys have one of these immersion blender, that would be awesome to emulsify the actual sauce. Usually when we wanted to make pasta, egg pasta from scratch, the proportion would be like 100 grams of eggs with 150 grams roughly of flour. And so what we do, we open the eggs, and if you have this kind of large eggs, usually each egg is roughly 50 grams, just like this one. And yeah, they're exactly 100 grams, like 102 grams. And then after that, we can measure the flour. I'm using just like a regular all-purpose flour. So I'm trying to get like 150 grams of flour, and we're gonna use them all, but sometimes it really depends of the structures of the dough that we want to knead, and so we might need a little bit more flour. That what it is. It depends also the quantity of the eggs that sometimes are, they absorb more flour than other times. So that's the two ingredients that we need for the dough. And the way we do this is by putting the flour on a surface, and then we make a hole in the middle like that. And then after that, we're gonna put the 2 eggs inside. And then we're gonna use a fork to start like kneading the eggs together. And as we do this movement, we're trying to get a little bit of flour at a time from the edge. It's very important that we do these steps slowly and carefully, that we take all the times that we need, because in the end you will see that the consistency of the dough has to be very smooth. so the dough will look like very, very smooth and elastic. Once we have reached pretty much half of the flour needed in the dough, and at this point you can see that the fork is having trouble to do the rest. Then it's when we start using our hands. That's the fun part. If you have a scraper like this, that can come handy. So you can start like pulling, moving the flour inside, so you can do this kind of movement with the other hand, which is the movement that we want to do to knead the dough, is to use this part of your hands, the palm, and trying to push the dough and fold it on itself. And as you do that, you add more flour and use more flour. So this amount of flour and eggs should give you probably 2/3 serving of this tagliatelle. As you can see, the flour is almost all been absorbed. So now it's time where we have to knead the dough and keep stretching it. So how do we know if is enough or not? We do know that when we are trying to continue to knead the dough and we have this kind of result, so that the dough is still very soft and moistured. So that means that we need a little bit more flour to do that. So once all of the dough is kneaded, and while you're working on it, you don't have this feeling of get sticky on your fingers, in kind of means that the dough has enough flour. So like I said, we can just put a little bit of flour on the side, and we can continue to work on the dough by doing this. It takes a little bit of energy, but it's worth all the time that you need it, because then the result will be delicious. So the movement is to rotate the dough, and with your palm basically kind of like stretchy and pull forward, and then you rotate a little bit more, like 30 degrees, and you do this movement. That is the way that my grandma used to make fresh pasta for our Sunday meal, family meal. So I kind of like watched her to do that many times. This process obviously depends how much flour and eggs you're gonna use, but can take up to like 15-20 minutes kneading. So I think that we're very close, because I can feel that the dough is very elastic, and as we're continue to knead the dough, I can feel that it's not sticky, almost not sticky anymore. So the step will be to check if the dough is ready. What we do We're trying to close the bottom. And then you can see that now it's very smooth and it's not sticky anymore. And the last trick that tells you that the dough is ready is that you push the dough down with your finger, and then it's supposed to push, the dough is supposed to push back up. That means that it's been kneaded very, very, very well. So if you do this and it comes right up like it did, it means that it's ready. We needed to let it rest for like 20 minutes or so, and what we do is either we wrap it with some kind of like film, or you can also like just cover with a bowl like that and let it rest. For to make the sauce, which is the basil pesto, all we need is fresh basil. Quantities are a little tricky to determine, because the other thing with the pesto is that you can make even more than what you need, and basil pesto can be frozen. So you can freeze the pesto, and the way you do, you can either like use one of these like a little ice form, you know, the one that you put like the water inside and you put it in the freezer, so they, you know, they make like a ice cubes, and you can pour the pesto in these ice cubes form and then just leave it in the freezer. When they are like all frozen, then you can just pop them up and pop them out, and then you can just like put it in a plastic bag or in a container. So every time you need, you can just take one from the freezer and literally drop it into your pan, so it melts and you use the rest of the basil. So let's say that for making this sauce here, if you want to give them, if you want to give you guys a quantity, what I'm making right now has like about 30 grams of basil. That's about it. So another little trick that it can be handy when you make basil pesto is that if you want to preserve the color of and the texture of the basil leaves, if you use a blender like this, the natural rotations of the power of the immersion blender will warm up the fibers of the basil, which will make them change the color. So what you can do to avoid that is to put like the container that you will use to make the pesto into the freezer for a few minutes. So that way the container is going to be very cold, so when the basil is into the container and then you use the blender, basically the cold will preserve the color of the, you know, the shiny green color of the basil pesto. So if you do that, then you can just put your basil in the container, and then it's very important that you use extra virgin olive oil. That will already give you the sauce very nice and flavor. All we need to do is basically make a paste. So as we use the blender on top of the basil, we start pouring a little bit of oil. Then more oil. So at this point, you can see that the way I like them to make like the basil pesto sauce, especially when it's like made from scratch, is to break the pesto, but do not like leave to make it like very, very smooth, because I like the texture of the leaves breaks. So I don't like to be like a very, very smooth, because then you can see, you know, there is like some piece of basil that are like crushed but not completely smooth. So that's what I wanted to reach as consistency. And a lot of people use pine nuts or any sorts of like different nuts, or also salt and pepper into the basil pesto, which I don't, because I don't want to alterate the chemical compositions of the actual sauce made from basil and olive oil, because all of these extra flavor you can add it if you want, and while you actually make the dish. So you can put like salt and pepper and like pecorino or like crushed nuts while you actually build, you're building your dish. This is the most natural way, I think, to make the pesto, to basil pesto, by just using the actual pesto and olive oil. So after 20 minutes, we see that our little dough is kind of relaxed. So it's like starting being able to, use and stretch. So what we want to do, we want to put a little bit of flour on a surface, on a smooth surface, and then we have to start stretching the dough. So the way we stretch the dough is by making a pressure through all the surface of the dough, going back and forth, and then rotate the dough as 45 degrees on one side and continue to stretch it. And as we do stretch the dough, we have to make sure that the surface has enough flour. So once the dough is stretching and we reach like consistency that we need, the old part of the dough that is inside is still like a little bit moister. It's nice and dry. That's very important when we want to actually shape the tagliatelles. It has to be dried, and so that way they don't stick to each other. There is still a little bit of elasticity because as we stretch, it tends to, to retract itself, but that's okay. We want to try to have a perfect circle as we do that. As we reach this kind of thickness, we start to see that the dough is kind of like staying, stretching, not like in the way that it's supposed to be, not anymore like sticky. So what we do, we start like rolling the one side of the dough around the roller pin, and then as we turn the dough, we kind of like use a little bit of flour so it's not sticky, and then we kind of stretch the dough as we roll it down. We gotta do this for a few times. In that way, the volume of the circle is almost 3 times bigger as it was the first circle. And we continue to stretch. You can see that the dough is not sticky anymore. But don't be shy by using flour, because that's okay while we're doing this process. You kind of want to make sure that it's almost perfectly round. Even if it's not perfectly round, that's okay, but it will help with the shaping of the tagliatelle. How do we know when it's done? Is about to be like a very few millimeters thick. You can see that it's very thin now compared to what it was. It is very thin. You can almost like see through it. Not really, but it's very, very thin, and it stays the way we have shaped it. So it's not elastic anymore, so it's not going to shrink. So We use a little bit more flour on top of it. And then we're almost ready to shift it into a tagliatelle. So now what you need to actually make the tagliatelle is just a knife. And how do we make those? We start from one of the two ends, top and bottom, and then what we do, we roll it, the dough on itself. We roll it without making pressure, just rolling, very nice and gentle, until we kind of reach half of the sphere. And then we do the same with the opposite side. Making sure that we have enough flour. It's not going to be sticked to each other. And then we roll it until we reach the other end. And when we reach the other end, then we have two kind of like cylinder, let's say that, we kind of put on top of each other, like that. And then now, what we do is cutting them. And as you cut them, you roll them down, and so you have your tagliatelle. Don't worry if they're a little sticky, you just gently leave it on the surface and use a little bit of flour so they will stay separate. And then you just continue to do that until you have all of them shifted down, and you can just leave it for a few minutes, either on a smooth surface so they can like kind of dry them out a little bit, or like on a tray like this with a little bit of flour on top. Like that, and basically they're ready to be cooked. We're going to assemble the dish, and to do that we need our basil pesto sauce that we made earlier, and then a little bit of minced garlic, some butter, a little bit of butter, some basil for decorations, and one of your favorite cheese that you like to put on the dish, on the pasta. Like you can use pecorino, you can use Asiago, you can use Parmigiano or white cheddar, whatever you like to sprinkle on your pasta. I'm using pecorino romano on my dish. So what we have here is just like a water boiling, and so what we're gonna do, when the water is boiling, we're just gonna drop those gently into the water and just kind of let it stay and kind of separate a little bit them, stir them gently so they're not gonna, And the nice thing about the fresh pasta is that they're very fast to get cooked, So once you drop them in the water and you stir them, the chicken almost immediately comes up, like in this case. And so you just like continue to stir them for maybe 3 minutes, couple minutes. And as you do that, you can put your dish together. In this case, we use olive oil, so not extra virgin olive oil, just olive oil. A little bit of minced garlic. Let them warmed up a little bit. And so now that our pasta is almost cooked, we want to finish the cooking process into the pan. So what we do, we just kind of drop the pasta from the water to your pan. Turn it off the water and we continue the cooking process here. These are our noodles. All you have to do is just stir them. And what I do is I'm gonna sprinkle some pecorino on top of it. Use a little bit of the water that we just cooked the pasta because it contains a lot of starch based on the fact that we have made those pasta with obviously flour. And just continue to stir them. And you can see that it naturally starts to creamy. So because the starch contained into the pasta and the water, it's not anymore like just oil. It's like some kind of like a creaminess that it's going down. So at this point we can turn it off the stove. And just now, since the basil pesto sauce is like a very delicate sauce, so we don't want it to actually burn the leaves, and so we want to kind of like remain the kind of brightness color of the the green pesto. We just wanted to. It's kind of like a topping that you want to put on your pasta to give flavor, but you don't want to actually cook because there's really nothing to cook from the pesto. So you're just gonna add some pesto, and to continue the process of the creaminess, you can drop a few dots of butter. So that way you can start stirring. And if you feel that it's too thick, you can always add a little bit more water and a little bit more cheese to give the texture and the flavor. I wish you guys could be here to smell this wonderful pesto. It is very, very intense. One of the key of the Italian cuisine is that we want to highlight the actual goodness of the flavor based on the fact that if you use quality ingredients, we don't really have to have like lots of extra flavor on it. So we don't want to over season, we don't want to over flavor things, because the intense flavor comes from the actual ingredients. So once we have this consistency, we are kind of ready to plate the pasta. And we're ready to sprinkle a little bit more of cheese on top. So gentle like that. Some decoration with basil. And so then you can enjoy it.